Okay, so what is new in Q-SYS Designer 9.7? So we have a couple of things to go over today. I'm going to get started on the first couple of them. The first thing that we're going to get into, and I'm kind of going to be, I'm gonna go through the slides, and then we're actually going to go through and see it in Designer, because I want you to get a good idea of how exactly stuff's going to work. So the two big product additions from 9.7 are going to be the NMT1 network tabletop microphone and the AV bridging feature license. So the great thing about the microphone, it is a native Q-SYS device, meaning that there's not a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to integrating it. Also, with the built-in LED ring around the side, it natively fits in with call sync. All of this is done out of pins and logic that I will show you here in a few minutes. The other is the AV bridging feature license. This opens up the USB-C port on the back of the Gen 3 touch panels and lets you turn that into a bridging device. We'll go through what the exact feature set is as it relates to that, but those are the two big things we're going to go over. Now let's talk about the microphone and AEC, because this was a spec that changed a little bit over the development of the product. So you may have heard things earlier on in development that are not actually true anymore. So what there is now inside of every core that is running 9.7, there is some dedicated AEC resources just for the NM series microphones. And then there is some dedicated resources for third-party microphones. So what we've got now is, when you go into check design, and I'll show this as we go ahead and put it in, but on a Core 110, for example, you can put in two NMT1s and still have your full 16 channels of AEC for your third-party microphones. Once you get past two, then you will notice that it starts cutting into your available third-party AEC resources, 4 channels at a time. Excuse me. So you can theoretically get to a maximum of 4 NMT1s on a 110. And I will, there you go. So here is your total capacity by core. Now, the NMT1 functions in 2 different modes, wideband and full band. Wideband is for more for if you're going to be doing a lot of conferencing with it. Most conferencing platforms will only transmit the microphone audio at 16K. So it doesn't really do you a lot of good. It's kind of like if you have a 4K camera and you put it on Zoom, you're not sending 4K. So instead of processing all of that sample rate, we give you the ability to knock that down to wideband and increase the capacity, because running in wideband takes less processing than running full band. So you've got this little chart, and before everybody asks, everybody gets a copy of the deck, right, Kev? After the
Yes, the chart's also on the website for the mic and in the help guide, and I believe the website has a nice little calculator that says I have this many mics, I have this core, and it'll show you how many AEC, and you can play with that live of manipulating that.
We'll go look at that before we're done. I knew they were going to do that. I didn't know if that was quite up yet, but we'll check on that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so here's your capacities by core. That is a chart that I'm sure most people will need to reference fairly regularly until you get it committed to memory. And then, never mind. Whoa, how did I get so far ahead? Okay, so the other things that we're going to talk about is peripheral mode for the Nano and the 8 Flex. With the supply chain issues that we've been having with the IO USB bridge, along with the fact that we've had some issues as far as QIOs and things like that, but this is now a new way where you can take a piece of equipment that you may already have or that we can fairly readily make and turn it into a peripheral. When you take a Nano and turn it into a peripheral, you still get both RS-232 ports, you still get the USB bridging features, and then when you go into the 8 Flex, you now get the 8 Flex channels and the GPIO. So this can become a fairly cost-efficient method, because if you were to try to get 8 channels on a QIO, a GP8x8, a QIO S4, and an IO USB bridge, I guarantee you all of those things put together are way more expensive than an 8 Flex. So this is going to be a really nice option for smaller systems doing expansion, or even if you're doing a larger style system and you're basing it on a 610, this is a nice way where you could actually put an 8 Flex into a room and use that as some analog IO and still have some bridging and some GPIO. So those are the things that we're going to cover. And now I'm going to stop sharing for just a second while I switch screens around so that I can see what it is
that also gives helps fill a hole we had for dual redundant network audio IO. So QIO has 2 network ports, but those are in essence a switch on them. So it's used for daisy chaining QIO. It's not used for redundancy. If I need redundant audio IO, running a Core 8 Flex as a peripheral gives me that redundancy that previously was available on stuff like the IO 8 Flex or the IO Frame.
Yeah. All right, so now let's jump into Designer. Okay, so the things that we want to look at. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a microphone in here, and then I want to show you some of the things that happen. So we're going to go under Audio QLAN. We're going to go into an NMT1. Now, one of the things to remember about the way Q-SYS Designer compiler works, if an item is in the inventory, it is not considered by the compiler for DSP usage, network channel usage, anything like that. So with it sitting over here, you'll notice that we don't have anything going on. We have a peripheral, but we're not actually processing it just yet. But once we bring the mic in, one of the things that I do want to point out before we go much farther is even though this microphone block has 4 nodes on it, it is important to remember that it actually takes up 16 channels. It's one network stream, but it is 16 channels. So the mic actually has 16 internal mic elements. They all get brought into Designer individually. So when you start planning out how many network channels you have, just know that every mic is going to be one stream and 16 channels. But you can also see that we are now showing in our reserved Cat2 only that we have one Q-SYS mic in our design. So if we go in and add a second and bring it in, we now show that we have 2 Q-SYS mics in our design. All right, so one of the other things that I do want to show with the microphone, so the microphone has an AEC block built into it. So you have your 4 incoming beams, if you will. These are the quadrants of the microphone. You have the ability to ID them. When you hit the ID button, that little quadrant of the ring will start to blink, so you know the orientation of the microphone relative to these 4 beams. You can enable and disable beams. This is very helpful if you have a mic at the end of a table, or if you have it somewhere, like mine, for instance. I have one sitting on my desk. I have the 2 beams farthest away from me turned off just to minimize any reflections coming back into the mic. So if people are not actually going to be seated in 360 degrees around the mic, you can turn off whatever those beams are, minimize those reflections. You also have individual gain per beam, as well as some post-processing on here. Also, if you flip over into the AEC tab, you'll notice that this looks like a regular AEC block. This gives you all of your adjustment for the AEC, and here is your reference right here off to the side. So once we're in the properties, this is where you can rename the microphone as far as its host name for getting paired into the system. This is where you can change your bandwidth from wideband to full band. You can change how your beam orientation, so it can either be centered on the mic buttons or it can be in between the mic buttons. You can change your noise reduction, your AEC tail length, just like you normally would. You can also do your reinforcement outputs for your AEC, just like you would on a standard AEC block. And then we have our code access. So once we have this in, there is something else that we may want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and use some of what we were just talking about, which is under audio QLAN. I'm going to bring in an 8 flex and a nano. You will notice that these are under the audio IO because we are running them in peripheral mode. So much like in an NV32, if you go into device manager for this device, there is a page where you can change it from peripheral to core mode. And once it is in peripheral mode, then you can bring it in. So in this instance, we're going to go through, I'm going to turn on my USB bridging, just so we have this here. I'm going to do this for both of them. So now that I have a bridge, I'm going to bring in, no, not my video bridge. I'm going to bring in my HID conferencing block from both of them. So if you're familiar with doing conferencing, this is where you get things back from the bridge, like whether it's off hook or in a call, whether it's muted, whether it's ringing, whether it's connected. This is where we pull that status. And this is the beginning of how we enable call sync. So you will notice that when I enable call sync, I get this little call sync icon. And now, well, if you did this in 9.6, you will remember that, and I'm also going to bring in a touch panel, just so I have one of those. You will remember that that call sync was 1-to-1. You could come in from a conferencing call system. We had a call sync block that we could bring in. We could give it multiple, or we could come through it and have these link up, but it was just for one conferencing system. Now we have the option to have multiple call systems. So if I have this on an MTR and this nano on a BYOD in the room, I can now bring those together, and I can take the control for both of my NMT1s and enable call sync. And now what I will have is I will have a touch panel and 2 microphones, all of which will behave out of the single call sync configuration block as far as how we want our colors. If you come through, you can set your unmute color, your mute color, your ringing color, your idle color, user buttons, all of these things. As far as your LED configuration, this will all now sync up between your different devices. All right, so the last thing that I want to show, speaking of our touch panel, You will now notice that on this touch panel, we have these different bridging capabilities, just like we do on a Nano or an 8 Flex or an NV. We now have our HID conferencing. We have speakerphone in and out. We have a video bridge. We have all of these things that we can now bring in, just like we would if we were setting up a conferencing system with another set. So one thing to understand about the AV bridging on the touch panels, it is a USB-C connection. It is still just doing the audio and video bridging. It's not actually pulling the content in. You would still need to ingest it somewhere. And the other thing to remember is that the AV bridging license is only applied per device. So if you have 3 touch panels in 3 different rooms, all on the same system that you all want to use the bridging out of, you would need 3 AV bridging license. That is applied on the core, but it is then it is then per device that you use as a bridge. So I believe that, did I miss anything?
We got one question and one thing I was going to ask you to show, Steve. So first question, are you running your mic in wideband or full band mode?
It is in wideband.
Cool. And then can you spend a second and show inside that call sync block and talk about how the mute button and the proximity sensor work on the mic?
Sure. Oh, like you want to see mine?
No, just talk about
just talk about how they work. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay, so the mute button, we have a couple of different options on here, whereby we can either have local control of the mute, meaning that if I press the button on the mic, that does it, or we can also turn it to remote control of the mute button. The mute button mode can also be enabled or disabled, as well as the call button, which is on one side, and the user button that is on the other side. The proximity sensor. So the proximity sensor is interesting in that right out of the box, when you first hook this up, if you put your hand over the microphone, you'll watch the LED ring run around the edge. That's called the fuel gauge. That basically lets you know that your hand is in position, and it's doing a countdown to when it actually will fire off the fact that you have your hand there, and it comes linked to the mute. So what that means is it's actually 3 different parameters that we have on by default, but that can be turned off or broken in that chain. So there is a world where you can, where'd my control go? Okay, here's my control. I can come in here and I can say proximity sensor trigger, and I can expose this trigger right here. I can also pull out this fuel gauge state. So what that means, if you pull this trigger out and you emulate, and then you come into call sync and you break this link to mute, you can now use the proximity sensor trigger to do whatever you want. That's now just available in Designer. I can have that, turn my system on and off. I can do whatever I want to with it. So the same thing holds true with the user button. The user button sits right here. Again, it is just a trigger, which you can then use to do other things inside of Q-SYS. Is that what you were getting at?
Yep. Yeah. So what I've used like the user button before is if I have a very simple system, that might become my display power on and off. And now I don't even need a user interface in the room. And because that user button color there is selectable at runtime, I've actually done some very basic, just using a selector to feed that and change that color based off if I turn my display on or off. So It'll be red when it's off and green when it's on. The other thing with all these buttons is if you turn them off, they are dead faced on the microphone, so you do not see them when you turn them off. So if you turn off the mute buttons, you don't see it. You turn off user, you don't see it. The call will switch between red and green based off if you're in a call or not. So a lot of cool customization you can do right there with the mic. Let's see. We got two questions. One, can you explain the difference between local and remote mute? And can you end the call with the proximity sensor?
I mean, you could if you ran it through some logic and tied it to your tied it into your HID, then sure you could. All right, so what they're asking about
local and remote mute control.
Okay, so when it's set to remote and you hit the mute button, it doesn't actually mute the microphone. It just opens this mute state active. It just opens and closes that, which you can then use to drive other things. But when it's in local mode, if you hit the mute button, it will mute the microphone. So it's actually in here. This microphone mute is what gets muted or unmuted, depending on which mode you're in. So it really just depends on if you're using the NMT1 in a fairly typical scenario where you're tying it in, you're doing some processing, you're going out to a video bridge or some kind of an audio bridge where you're doing some conferencing. You would use it just in its standard mode. But if you have some sort of a use case whereby you want to leave the mic hot, but still keep those mute buttons to be able to do some muting maybe somewhere else in your design, you can do that. You can put it into remote mode and the mic will technically stay hot. Know this part though, before anybody gets concerned, because I know that when we teach the gain structure and the AEC classes, we always talk about make sure you mute past your AEC. This mute button is past the AEC. So the internal AEC continues to run, even if you hit the mute on this, since it's all in one block. The AEC is still getting its process, or is still getting its signal. We're just muting it right before it comes out. It's just like a global mute right at the output. It's the same thing as if you had a regular mic coming in and you put a gain right here at the backside of it. That answer that?
Yep.
All right. It's all yours, Mr. Rodas.
Cool. So let me pull up. We're going to go through a bunch of different video features we've had. Share. Screen 2. Share. Okay, cool. I don't pop out. Why? There we go. Perfect. Okay, so a couple different things. Just like in the past couple versions, we're continuing to improve the image quality on the 12x80 and 20x60 PTZs. So there are some new default settings. If you have one in an existing design, you simply go in and reset your camera settings and it will apply the new settings. We have also, it's not on the screen, but we've improved the quality of the stream coming off an IO USB bridge, so that that is a USB 2.0 MJPEG stream that's got a higher quality stream coming out of it now. And then on NB, we now include in our EDIDs a support for 21:9 aspect ratio. So this falls really nicely with Microsoft Signature Teams rooms. So you are now able to pass 21:9 aspect ratio video through the NV series video endpoints. And on the NV, a couple smaller features we've had. We add the ability to freeze HDMI video. So this was a request we got a lot from especially higher ed. to be able to freeze a source and unfreeze it. And I'll show you where that control enables. And auto privacy. So in 9.6, we had the ability to do Mediacast to HDMI. However, that if you did that, auto privacy would not properly work. We now have added the ability for auto privacy. So what auto privacy does is it looks at if a camera is in use anywhere. So whether that's streaming out USB or going to Mediacast, if it is not being used anywhere, it will automatically flip the camera around backwards and put it into privacy mode. And then the last one was we realized with that Mediacast to HDMI, we didn't give any controls of what camera was routed to that NV. So we added that ability as well. So let's go ahead and dive into Designer and take a look at those couple. So here I've got my NV as a core. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my HDMI switching block. We're going to add a camera, and we will add a source and display. So we have our source, we have our display, and I'm going to route my camera here to the Mediacast input. So we'll start with our source. We'll see under our EDID, it won't show up in emulation because the EDIDs are on the core, but this is where I would set my EDID for 21.9 if I was doing that. On my switching block, we now see we have a tab here for our Mediacast input. So whether this is NV as a core or if it's a NV as a decoder, you both will get this Mediacast input here. And this is where I can see what source is routed. So it will tell me what the Mediacast source is. I can enable or disable auto privacy, and I can set a delay time. So how long do I wait to go into auto privacy? Anywhere from 1 second to 600 seconds. And then here is our camera control. So this gives me my coordinates and all of my PTZ controls. So whatever camera gets routed, in this case, it's just going to be my 12x80, but I might have this being fed off the output of a Mediacast router. And now whatever camera gets routed, I would be able to have controls here that I could put onto a UCI to be able to control that camera.
Can you also show it where you do multiple cameras directly into the HDMI IO block?
Yeah, so we can also enable our Mediacast input. We can go anywhere from 0 to 100. So if I have 5 here, and we'll bring in 5 cameras. Take a plethora of cameras here. I think I put one too many, but that's okay. Make this 6. Now I could route all those cameras straight to my NV. And we'll see when we open this block. Now I have all those available. And that's where it becomes, this source becomes more valuable because it would tell me which one is actually routed at that time. So I can choose which Mediacast source is routed. So this is a case where in 9.6, I would have to look at what source I have selected and then use a layer or something to bring those camera controls. Now we've made that easier, that these camera controls will just get routed to whatever camera is in here. One thing I wanted to point out too, the 12x80, the previous PTZ IP cameras are now discontinued. So you'll see they do not show up in here. However, if you have a design that still has those cameras in it, you simply hit show discontinued, and now you're able to bring in the PTZ 12x72 and the PTZ 20x60. So 9.7 and higher, we are only supporting moving forward the NC cameras. We can still bring those in, but we won't be doing any software firmware update for those cameras. And then the last one we had was our freeze. So in our HDMI display block here, we can see now when we emulate, we can choose our video freeze right there. So this allows me to freeze video to that individual source, and it will hold it up however long I keep this freeze high. And then once I unfreeze, it will go back to whatever the live source routed to that block is. So let's see, we got a couple questions here. Any plans to allow HDMI from NV to inject to Mediacast? Stay tuned on that. There's lots of software stuff we are working on in that realm. So as we announce that, I'm sure we'll go into all the different use cases we could use for some of those. Can an NV be used in peripheral mode with a Core 110 or 8 Flex? Yes. So here I have my NV as a core, but let's go ahead and switch our core in our design to be a 8 Flex. And now I can bring in an NV. So even if I just have a single NV in my system and I'm not using it as a video endpoint, if I set this as a decoder, I am still able to run this as a 3x2 matrix. And I can, in fact, even turn off, just to clean my block up, my AV input count down to none. So now I still have my Mediacast input, I have my 3 HDMI inputs, and I have my 2 HDMI outputs. So running it as a decoder will automatically give us the NV just as a standalone unit tied to a normal core. Nick asks, is auto privacy an option in the camera block as well? Auto privacy is always set in the bridge block. So whether it is set up in the Mediacast input here, or if I bring, let's enable a video bridge on our core, and we'll run that there. And now when we go and look at our core block, we have auto privacy here. And so as long as I have it enabled in one spot, it will track across. So if I enable auto privacy always on the bridge end, because it's looking at the bridge to determine if that camera is in use or not. Brandon asks, how do we get the Mediacast pins to show up for the NV32? So this was
it comes with one of them.
Yep, it always comes default with one starting in Designer 9. What version did we add that, Steve? 5 or 6?
4 or 5.
4 or 5. I think it was 5. But then I can customize that right here under Mediacast input count. So I can choose anywhere from 0 to 100. One thing to pay attention though, let's add another display just so we can show this, is that the Mediacast input is only available to HDMI output 1. So I cannot output it on my second HDMI, even if I have a second monitor wired. So, and even if I have multiples, if we go back to our 6, all 6 in. And doing follow HDMI 1 will not stream it over, I believe.
No.
So I can only output cameras on HDMI output 1 of the NV32. That's now the cool thing with this works regardless of what mode. So we saw it as NV as a core, we saw it as a decoder, but I also can use this on an encoder. So if I have a NV32 as my encoder, and we'll move our source over here, turn back on our AV input just so we can see. And now, instead of pulling my cameras out at my decoder, I can actually pull them out at my encoder. So we see Mediacast is set to 1. I can set that up to 3. I don't know why my pins are not showing up.
That's new.
Yeah, I should be seeing my pins there. And I will get my, oh, I know why. I need to enable my HDMI output, and then I will get my pins. So once I enable my HDMI output, we'll wire a display to that. Just keep moving everything on down. So now I have my HDMI display coming off my encoder, and now I can grab my cameras. And if you hit space when you're wiring, you can get our lovely signal snake. And now I have my cameras running to my encoder, and I'll run them over to my decoder. So this is a really cool application where maybe I have my encoder feeding off. I have laptop coming in. I have my Zoom room or Teams room or Google Meet appliance. I run a local HDMI out back to it to feed content. Maybe I have an existing Cisco or Polycom or physical video codec device in the room. I can off my encoder, grab an HDMI and be able to route one of those cameras right back into that HDMI output from my encoder and back into that device. So it does not matter if I'm an encoder, decoder, or core mode. All of those are able to output the camera. Oops, sorry, it's on the encoder block. Able to output that Mediacast stream right to their HDMI output. So and we see there's our controls right there on our encoder. All right. Let's see what else we got.
So there's a couple of questions on here. One of them about cameras can have their preview shown on a G3 touchscreen. What about HDMI inputs for a preview? That is part of the same process as far as having other things or having any HDMI source available on the network. I believe that is in process, but I don't have a timeline on that. But that is something that we're working on because that's a fairly common request, is for people to be able to preview their video sources as well. Is there a way to have a still image stored that can be displayed on the HDMI either with a trigger or with a loss of video? Absolutely. So anytime you put an NV32 into a system, you have these three graphic options. Those are set on the core. You go into Core Manager and into Video. There's a place to upload those three graphics. You can also go through and you can determine when they go, what you do with them. The one thing to remember, though, is that those three graphics are global for the entire system. So it's not per NV that you can do this, but you can set up like what happens when the core is disconnected. You can define the three graphics. You can define the idle screen and when it goes. You can add things to it. So yes, there are plenty of ways that you can make the NV say and do very interesting things when it is not in use, or if you just want it to, because you can force it idle. So if you've got this dynamic idle screen inside the block, you can force it into its idle state.
Yep. So you see here with the dynamic idle, those three images, there's really four slots. We have graphic 1, 2, and 3. And then there's an idle image here. So with our idle image, we can actually do dynamic idle screens here where there is sort of global information on the left and individual NV information on the right. So this might be welcome to Q-SYS, and then this would be theater room and theater room system, and some more custom text here. And so this all gets overlaid on your idle image. So Lots of cool stuff you can do with dynamic idle screens there. But like Steve said, those are all set up in the display block. We can choose. So idle mode is what happens if I'm plugged into a source and somebody disconnects and I lose sync. After 15, 30, 60, or 120 seconds, we tell it what to do, and we can either say go to idle screen, black the video, or go to one of 3 graphics. And then sleep mode happens after that timer. So after that goes into idle mode, then we can choose any 1, 5, 30 seconds, 1, 10, 30, 60 minutes, or 8 hours. And we get the same options and disable HDMI. So in this case, if I set this to just 1 second after, we're going to see it actually will turn off HDMI video sync. This is really cool if you put like an NV32 in front of a room system. Now that system will stop sharing content. And then once video sync is re-enabled, once a source plugs back in or I route to a video source that has sync, it's going to automatically come out of sleep mode and turn back on the HDMI port, and will re-enable sync. So it's a quick way to act as a to start and stop HDMI video sync. Cool. Awesome. Let's jump back over to our PowerPoint. So a couple more things here with Enterprise Manager. Really cool beta feature we added. You can see there's some stuff coming with this. We added the ability to back up design files to the cloud. So the last 5 versions of the designer file that are pushed to the core will automatically be saved into Enterprise Manager, and you're able to actually export them. Now, in this beta version, there's a couple caveats. The first is any values that change once the file's running. So if I change a gain knob, if I change the state of any control, that currently is not being backed up in this backup. So it really is sort of a snapshot of where the design file was when you pushed it. That is a feature that is coming. And the second is restoration. So coming in a later designer version is the ability to actually push that file and the latest runtime settings back from the cloud to the core. So let's take a look right now at what this looks like. I come over to Enterprise Manager. We can see I've got my system right here. And now I have this option for design backup. And here are the last 5 versions. If I open this up, I can see the design code and the date and time that it was loaded, and what firmware, what size the file is, and what the core name is. So I can go through and look at all these. And if any one of these I want to download, I can simply hit export, and it will allow me to download the Q-SYS file version of that file. So I can download straight from Enterprise Manager that version of the file. Pretty cool feature. In addition, a couple small things. We added HTTPS support for MediaStream receiver. We added Zip4 extension. We added the ability for buttons to trigger user-defined events. We added a peak limiter control to the generic speaker component. So this allows you to actually control the limiter in the amplifier. And we added the ability for keypad tones on both VoIP and POTS controller can now be outputted when the line is idle on a hook or off hook. So this is a way to get key confirmation playback in the room. So previously, you'd have to take an audio player and play the DTMF tone and everything. This now we have the ability to play that tone back in the room. And then finally, couple more just overall Q-SYS Designer things. We've added a product type filter to Asset Manager because, as you've noticed, we've quickly started ramping up the rate at which we're putting out plugins. So now I can actually sort by type. And if I just want to see displays, I can see that. We brought back the ability to manage audio file and mask within Core Manager. Q-SYS Designer now supports Windows 11 Pro. And we added Lua modules that can be pushed through Asset Manager. So you'll start seeing some Lua modules appear on Asset Manager. In addition to all that, as always, if I come to, sorry, let me go to my release notes. There is a whole plethora of bug fixes as well. So I encourage you to go through the help file or go online, q-syshelp.qsc.com, and this will give you the release notes and sort of go over everything we went over today, as well as all the bug fixes. And just like with previous versions, most of these bug fixes are going to be incorporated into a new LTS build that should be released later this week. So new features like the microphone, bridging off the TSC, those are all new features that does not get added to the LTS branch, but many of these bug fixes do get added back into the LTS branch. So with that, let's go ahead. We're going to open it up for any questions. Let's see. The first one was, is two-factor authentication. I don't believe it's in 9.7 yet. I need to go check, but I know it is very, very close to being released for Enterprise Manager. Let's see, any chance we could open up the ability to search in the component field to be able to search, find folder names so we don't have to search the exact component plugin user component name?
So that actually works. Like if you're typing in, it should look, it just, I understand what George is asking, and I've already brought that up, and that's being addressed from what I understand. Because if you, like the LG plugin doesn't say LG in its actual name, the folder is just called LG. So if you just type LG into search, you won't find that plugin. So I don't know if it's going to be a redo of how search works, or if it's going to be a redo of the naming convention of the plugins that search is looking through. But I have brought that up because trust me, I have run into that as well.
Yep. And then George asked about channel group. I don't have an update on that. I would follow up with support on that if you have a case open. And I believe, let's see if that is made it to, as we get some update on that, it will get added into the known issues on the online help, as well as on the online help on the help knowledge base that you can go to when you go to support. Let's see, any plans to have NV provide basic digital signage function? You can sort of do a very, very limited version with the images, but that is definitely something we are looking into with the NV, is the ability to display more things than just images. Can we limit admin access in Core Manager yet? So in Core Manager, you can set up, I'm hoping this answers your question, Neil, but you can set up a variety of users, and once you enable at least an admin user.
Yeah, I think what he's saying is, so if you enable an admin by default has full access to the core. So what you would need to do is not enable whoever that is as an admin. You would need to put them in as a user level and then just give them everything you want, because I'm pretty sure everything is available.
Yeah, and you can also, we have custom roles that have been out for a little while where I can make this. if we want to call this a technician
or a
tech
super
plus
user
who has, so I can set full access, but I don't allow them, they don't see user management, they might not see, I don't know what else I'd want to limit them from, reflect management, or maybe only let them view. So I can go through here and do it on a per section of core manager basis and set up a role here. I do this a lot when I want a user to be able to access audio files. So I say audio file, and this user only has the ability to see audio files. And now if we make a user, we'll call this user audio. We're going to set that as an audio file user. And let me log out. Now that user can only see the audio files. Unfortunately, right now, there is no way to limit them from seeing the inventory. They're always going to see the inventory status here, but they can't control anything from here. And then I can come in and I am able to look at the audio files.
Okay, so this will the last question, or the next question, brings me to something that I was actually going to bring up. Where legacy systems are working fine, you recommend updating to 9.7. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's working, if a legacy system is working fine, or you have a system where you want to have the occasional new feature, but maybe not necessarily every new bell and whistle, excuse me, that is why we now have an LTS branch that stands for long-term support. Right now, that is Designer 945. I know it says 944. 945 was just finished. It's just not up on the site yet. So that is going to have critical bug fixes, security updates, things like that, as well as a limited set of new features. 945, I believe, has the limiter adjustments on the generic speaker block. It's got some of the high priority bug fixes and some of the known issues that have been fixed as well. So, you know, there are certain things that get put into the LTS. For example, like the Core 110 V2, that was released after 9.4. But it is an option in 9.4 for LTS to have a Core 110 V2. But certain things like the NMT1 does not work in LTS. So that is if you install a system, you know what you need out of it, and it's all in that LTS, then we highly recommend that you get into that LTS branch and then stay there unless you specifically need something new. And know that 9.4 is the LTS for now. At some point, that LTS will get changed or will get added to. I believe the long-term plan is to have a couple of LTS branches. They won't last forever, but once we get a version that we feel like is really nice and stable and all of that, we give you at least 24 months from the date of the release or whenever we promote it to LTS. So if we tell you at some point that 9.8.3 or whatever it is going to be promoted to LTS, we will guarantee you that for at least the next 2 years, you can run that without any kind of deprecation or anything like that. So that's my speech on LTS branch.
And then I'm looking right now. I don't have a we did add in 9.7 support for higher resolution. I believe it's up to 4K. Idle screen images, I don't believe I need to load a design with a NV in it. I don't know if we opened up support for anything beyond JPEG. But there are new images that are included with. I'm going to go ahead and load this up. There are new images that are included for camera privacy and disconnected, as well as graphic 2 and 3 on the NV that support these higher resolution formats. And third-party USB cameras, nothing currently on the roadmap for that.
Good. I answered all the questions with 2 minutes to spare.
Yep. Let's see how quickly I can load this up. Video and the. Awesome. Well, if that's everything we got, we want to thank you all for coming out today. Steve and I'll hang out for another minute or two if there's any other questions that come in, but thank you guys for coming out, and trying to pull up what our next one is. We have not put out.
Yeah, I don't think we
yet.
published the
April come out in the next probably the next week or so. Also, make sure if you have not signed up yet, sign up for Activate on April 5th. There's going to be a lot of very cool stuff announced at Activate.
I can tell you that is going to be clocking domains next week. And then the 11th, we'll do dynamic audio processing again. We will be off the 18th. And then we will do designing with NV32 on the 25th. That's all I know.
Yep. So it looks like still it's still limited to JPEG images for idle and graphics still store on the NV. And where can we sign up for more training? So for deep dive webinars, if you go to our website and go to resources, webinars, or it's just Q-SYS.com/webinars, so we can sign up for all the deep dives, and then all of our on-demand training is, of course, available under right here. Under that resources, there is a link to training. They'll take you right to the Q-SYS training website. There's also a lot of great links to training resources on communities as well. So I encourage you, if you've not signed up for communities, sign up for communities. And there is a whole series of articles and blog things just exclusively for communities that go into some training topics as well. Awesome. Well, if that's all we got, well, thank you all for coming out again, and hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.